Alan, thank you so much, man, for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since having spoken with you once before, I've been keenly looking forward to this one today.
Yeah, likewise as well. And it's one of those conversations, these prompts have been like playing over in my mind, but I've now got to this point in time where I'm actually excited just to see what comes through, because I've entered the conversation without scripting anything per se. So I'm looking forward to walking through it all with you, Mark.
So as you're aware, Alan, we kick it off with, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yeah, this is a huge question, and I feel like it's one that, when I really sat with it, it's alternated so many times. But then I actually realised that alternating process is indeed part of the journey. But I think the question that came through more than anything, and I think this has probably been both unconscious but also conscious for me, is where do I belong? And how do I best use my gifts? There's a relationship that exists with this, and I feel like this is something that's permeated a lot of my journey. It's taken me in many different directions as I've sought my identity outside of myself through various different guises on the path of life up until now. And I think the difference at this point in the journey is that I have more awareness, but this question has definitely followed me around and is still very much part of the journey. Is how do I best transmit my gifts, because we all have them, into this world?
These are gorgeous questions. Could you tell me, Alan, even where that first question around even where do I belong, can you give me a sense of when that took hold?
I can't remember a time in my life it's not been present. And to suppose give some context to it, I feel like it's probably been with me from childhood. Like, I suppose a lot of who we are has its place in past experiences, the programming of childhood, the events of childhood, all of these forces that influence how we think and how we feel, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. And make no mistake about it, is these forces are powerful in terms of like how they either subtly or very overtly influence how we show up in the world. And for me, I think a lot of that came from the need to feel validated from the outside, whether it's, seeking love from the adults in my life in my childhood, using my talents. I was a talented young footballer, almost from about the age of about 6 or 7, was immediately immersed in this world where scoring goals and playing well and performing, almost like, going towards that goal of being in sport. And all of that brought a lot of validation from the outside. And I think if I was to really look at it, it seems so simple, right? Because a lot of kids have this, we seek ways to positively reinforce our sense of identity when we're young. And this all carried through into my teenage years as well. But I think looking back, what was truly at work was really about the need to be validated from the outside, and the achievement was the vehicle that I used to get love. And this had almost imprinted itself so deeply into my psyche, into who I am, that it's followed me around for a very long time. And I'd love to tell you that it doesn't show up now, that I'm over it, that I've risen beyond it, awakened beyond it. I haven't, because I think life is a journey of meeting these forces again and again. It's that moment to moment awareness. But whether it was football, and then, in my sort of formative years of going to university, it was about the first class honours degree, and then it was about getting the best job and getting the fancy job titles and the pay rises, and like all of it was speaking to this pattern. But underneath it, I think, was this question of like, where do I belong and how do I use my gifts? And I would feel restless because I would use my gifts and I would get the thing, that validation from the outside. Something wouldn't feel right. Inevitably, that would come back. I would have a momentary period of where I could breathe and relax and feel like I had arrived, but very quickly I would always seem to come back to this thing of like something doesn't feel right, there needs, I'd get restless. And I think at the core of it is like, how do I show up? And this is the question I have now, is like, how do I take all of this knowledge and wisdom that I've gathered through my life and all of the ups and downs that have come with it, Mark? Make no mistake, none of this has all been about just getting fancy job titles and the recognition. It's also brought a stack of pain along with it. Relationship breakups, unhelpful patterns of behaviour, bad habits, all of these things to try to cope with how I was feeling in the inside.
I'm just reading a book of Anthony de Mello's at the moment, and he's always just harping on about how suffering is often the gateway for us to wake up to some sort of sense. I don't know, it seems just remarkably true, isn't it?
Yeah, unbelievably true. That it seems to be, I think life is always presenting us with opportunities to awaken. I think that the suffering happens because often when these opportunities arise, we go into a state of resistance because of our belief system that we're holding. And if I look at my own journey, to be completely honest, I think the belief I had was, I am not enough. And that core belief is at the root of these questions that I've often been asking myself, the need for the validation, seeking my identity outside of myself, seeking love and attention and confidence that, not within but without. And at the core of it all, really, and I suppose like Ram Dass says it best, he says, scratch down deep enough into every being and you will find some sense of unworthiness. And I think that's the force that has often showed up. That's the force behind the restlessness. That's the force behind my unhappiness, my inability to settle or to be present with what is already great and beautiful in my life at times. And it's caused a lot of heartache, not just in like my life capacity, but also in my work as well. I think looking back now with a sort of wiser head, I can see all the opportunities that were missed to awaken. And so when you don't choose the path of consciously moving into the change or the opportunity or the challenge, however you wish to label it, is that often life is no other way, because we keep making choices, and so those choices stack up. Those karmic forces are at work and only lead us to the lesson, if we could call it that, the suffering, the lesson, however you choose to position it. It leads us to it in another way. So it's kind of like, it's a hard thing to trust that flow of life. Like, I always loved the book by Michael Singer, The Surrender Experiment, and I thought that was a phenomenal discourse in this ability to surrender to life. But I can tell you now that there's been many times where I have not surrendered to life, and the challenges they've stacked up. So,
from your perspective, just because that sentiment of am I enough or I'm not enough, like over the course of so many of these interviews, and even just my observations, I think, of society at large, I do think that almost sits underneath much of the madness of our present time. How have you found somewhat more peace with that sense?
I think it's taken a lot of self-inquiry. That would be the starting point. My brother died 10 years ago of a drug overdose. Caught us all by surprise. Well, to some degree, given the way he'd been living his life. But, it was just obviously a very final end to his life. There was nothing left to be able to say. And I suppose, like most people in, that this part of the world, the west of Scotland, I was living my life largely on autopilot, if you could call it that. I didn't really have the tools and techniques to understand my own grief, and that sort of was an inflection point. It sort of led me on a bit of a journey, going into, like, I suppose what you might class overall as like sort of well-being space, but having went off and experimented with various different techniques, so therapy, coaching, breath work, meditation, plant medicines, working my way through all of these things. Again, to some degree, these are wonderful tools that can help us regulate ourselves better, shine the light of our consciousness on maybe parts of ourselves that have been, hidden from us or that we don't truly understand. And that has been very much like an unfolding, and it continues to unfold in one respect or another. I think the peace has come when I realised that this is like a journey that I'm going to keep revisiting these energies, if we could call them that I am not enough, or some of the other feelings, I don't feel safe, or there's so many core beliefs, there's so many things that come through to me that I reflect on. But I feel like the more that I come to an acceptance of the fact that these energies will emerge in different ways and in different times, because it's almost like you meet the same things, but it's just a different person or situation. But if you look at the underlying energy, it's like almost that spiral dance of life, rather than like life just moving from a linear, I fixed that thing and I'm moving through it. It's rather, we're just continually revisiting the same challenges, or however you choose to label them, opportunities or lessons, that I'm getting to revisit those things. And I think it's just coming to the conclusion that despite all of the plant medicine ceremonies I've done and all of the breath work I might do and all of the daily habits I've got, is that I'm still a human being, and I'm still caught in this collective consciousness that is, still largely egoic in its nature. And I own a part of that. And that the only thing that can bring peace is that moment to moment awareness of what is coming up. The triggers continue to come, different guises, different ways. Could be my partner, could be in work. And the only way that I feel like I've found any sense of lasting peace, because often, we do a great meditation and we come out of it, we feel expanded and calm and clear, or we have the big, powerful plant medicine ceremony where, we have these revelatory insights, but it's often in the simple moments. It's in the integration of what we're learning, and when we're polishing the mirror of our consciousness, it's often about like, what do we then do with the lessons, what we have sight of, and how we integrate that back in. And so I feel like peace has come just by having this moment to moment awareness and acceptance that I'm still going to face all of these challenging forces within myself, but just by having that awareness that it's coming up again. So let me maybe give an example of that. If sometimes, if I butt heads with my partner, for example, often it can feel in the moment that the thing that has come up that's triggered it is the source of it. But actually, when the energies settle, often I can look and go, have I felt like this before? And the answer is almost exclusively yes. And so I know that, the thing that may have been the friction point isn't actually the friction point. It's the deeper belief that I'm holding about myself or about the world. That's the thing that needs to be seen and felt and held. That is often that I don't feel like I'm doing enough. That's maybe one of the core beliefs that come up. And so just by being able to hold that, if I can contain that energy, that brings me a sense of peace, because I'm no longer seeking to be some superior or evolved being. I'm just very much saddled in my humanity, and realizing that, I'm just continually working through these lessons these energies, these triggers, these blind spots, they get you. It's a remarkable orchestration.
But isn't it incredible, even just listening to you? And we talked before. There's a number of similarities, I think, in just even how we've gone about these lines of inquiry. Listening to all the different modalities that you're exploring, and then even the thought that could come up for you or me or anyone else while in the midst of all of those things is that I'm not doing enough. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what sort of time would be required for enough, in the sense that we've defined it to ever be the case. But I also love what you're saying, though, in terms of just that capacity to notice that it's not in the moments of these big epiphanies or realizations. I think it's so much more interesting what is my relationship like with my everyday?
Yeah. And I think it's just, if you can find the center point of your being, which is difficult to do in this world. There's so much noise. We have family commitments and work commitments. We're trying to take care of ourselves. We're trying to take care of our loved ones. We're trying to meet the outward demands of what life is thrown in our way. And I have so much compassion for every being who's here on planet Earth right now, just trying to navigate through what sometimes feels like a fire in a madhouse. That's the only way to describe it. But I also feel like when we take the steps to nurture our being, and it might, we all have different preferences, so I may have mentioned a few modalities or things that I've done, but I'm not necessarily a stickler to say that will solve all your problems. It won't, that's the reality. And also, we all have things that we prefer for ourselves. For some people, feeling a sense of peace and centeredness is just going walking their dog in the morning before work, or it's a hug from one of the kids, or it's a brave conversation with their partner about their needs and desires. These are all powerful forces that can help us begin to uh, unblock the connection we have to our hearts, and I think by virtue of that, something bigger than just ourselves.
You said something earlier, and it wasn't related to breath work, but it was an acknowledgement of moments that allow you to breathe. I was just curious as to what that might entail for you.
Yeah, I often feel like I've come through so much on my journey, so many challenges, many of them self-generated, and I feel like when I am walking on the path of integrity, when I'm showing up and I'm having the difficult conversations that I know are necessary to keep the connections in my life, when I'm not surrendering my authenticity in favour of connection, and when I'm getting the chance to fully convey all of my being, this is one of those areas where I have the chance with somebody that makes me feel safe, or it could be any other environment. When I have that safety, and then it feels like I can just like breathe a little bit deeper into my body. I can feel the quality of my being, and I can feel like where to put my talents, like what words to put to it. Words are so clumsy sometimes, they can never fully convey the depth of maybe the felt experience we're having, but it allows me to convey more of who I am. And the more that I get more of myself out there, ironically, the right things come. Whereas before I would just like chase everything, and this has been something that I've had to really work through, even last year. But when I'm have aligning myself with the right things and the right people, that's the things that allow me just to breathe that bit deeper, and be fully connected to myself in a way that I don't get when I'm chasing everything from my sense of egoic self. When the idea of something is more potent than actually the quality that it brings to my actual life.
I know you mentioned the distracted nature of our kind of our culture, and many things that come to mind around the tension between what you're describing there and ideas or the ways that the world sometimes appears to work. Wondering from your sake, or from your perspective, what do you feel gets in the way of conveying kind of all of your being?
Oh, aside from my own patterns, which obviously we've touched on already, I just think the world is moving. Like, we're going through this quickening. I've heard it described as, the rapid acceleration of technology. I think the blistering demands of trying to raise a family, trying to work a job, trying to anchor yourself and your patterns, trying to, enjoy a meaningful life, where you explore the world and explore yourself. I just think that the noise of all of that can sometimes bring, like, it's like rust on the antenna. It can be sometimes hard to, like, channel and tune into the right frequency of, like, what life feels like for you when it comes to building a good life and one that feels aligned. I also think that there are other forces outside of just the emotional and the mental aspect, which is kind of like what I'm pointing at there. I think, we're living in an increasingly toxic world as well. Obviously, I'm not going to go into all of the climate change stuff. That's not necessarily an area where I'm hugely knowledgeable, but I think we are facing a world where there's a lot more toxicity, whether it's through, uh, the chemical exposures we get, all of the poisons that are in the food supply now, the water supply, and you get the gist of, there's a whole raft of things that the human body was never really meant to encounter. And I do believe that these things, that isn't just affecting us on a physical level, it's affecting us mentally, emotionally. I think it's affecting us spiritually as well. Um, and it's that layer of rust on the antenna, our ability to tune into the deeper aspect of life. And depending on your belief system, it could be God or the source or whoever you wish to explain it. But that felt connection to life itself, I think that it's very easy to become depersonalized, to do that through the exposures we get in life. And so this has been a big part of the journey as well, is to clean up the body, not just because of all the hedonistic living that I had went through for a couple of decades, but rather like just a genuine acknowledgement that as human beings we are up against, like, a lot more challenges, and it's trying to become conscious of those things without becoming neurotic. And that's a hard thing to do, right? Because everybody's got selling a solution. So if you went onto your social media and started to type in detoxification, you would get bombarded by about a million different opinions about how best to nurture your body, whether it's your dietary protocols, nutrition, exercise, all of these things. It's so conflicting, and I really feel it for every person, and especially if you've got a young family too. It's a bit scary sometimes, and I think, like, all of these things, like, unsettle us. They knock us off our centre. They wobble us. They wobble the foundations of the things that actually are fundamental to building a good life, which is, mental, physical, emotional well-being.
Isn't it remarkable, even just listening to you there, just the over the course even of this brief conversation so far, just how much you could feel optimistic and connected from this human experience, and then this, it almost feels like a perfect contradiction or paradox that we're living within, that all what you've just mentioned there is prevalent and a part of this experience as well.
I think sometimes the challenge that most of us face is we want certainty in the world, and the only way that we can achieve certainty is when things are black and white, when there is an answer, and that's the only answer. But I think we're living in this time now where, in fact, we've always been living in this dualistic experience, and I think two things can be right at the same time. Because I'm with you, despite the fact that I spoke about so much about challenges, whether it's inner challenges or outer tensions that are influencing how we can live a good life. Is that actually I'm an optimist. Like, I believe there's so much beauty in the world, and I was actually at a funeral on Friday. It was my uncle, who I was really close to, had passed away, and we were up at the graveside, right before, obviously, the coffin was sort of lowered into the ground, and the um, priest was speaking. He was talking about the scriptures and God and all of that, and I just caught out the corner of my eye a little bird that had perched itself just in a tree, literally right above the graveside, and I just couldn't help but find a sense of connection with this little bird. I was watching it intently as it was watching us and making lots of noise, and for me, I felt the connection, not through the words that were being said at the graveside, but I felt the connection through the movement of the trees, the way this little bird had just landed on this perch and began to sing its song, and there was something in that moment, something that I couldn't explain, something that went beyond listening with my mind, and just felt this sense of connection, which seems so ironic, of course, because you're there to give your attention fully to this, but it was so, yeah, it was so magnificent. It was just so present, and it kind of opened up something inside of me. That's when I really felt a lot more emotion moving, and I truly feel like these opportunities are around us all of the time. It's just, do we have the capacity in any given moment to open ourselves to it? And that can be really hard because we're overstimulated, we're stressed, we're living in survival mode. We're in those instincts of survival are still present in us, and it blocks us from seeing, the beauty of getting down, at the same level as your kids and building something with them, or spending some time to invite them up to help you chop up some veggies, or throw something together, in the pan to make some food, or all these little opportunities that, our children are looking for, or in any capacity, our parents, like it stops us from connecting with our humanity, like love, the simple principle of love. Like, it's all around us. It grows, the more it's demanded, the more it grows, but it's sometimes that we feel disconnected in ourselves through all these survival emotions, and so it's hard to access those things sometimes. It's hard to see the beauty in them.
Do you know, man, I came home last week, and there was definitely stress in my day just around navigating some financial things at the moment. And I came home, and my daughter, I spent about 3 hours with her before putting her to bed. And over the course of those 3 hours, we made jigsaws, we danced, we painted, we jumped on the bed, like all stuff that, like, there's no need for a huge financial outlay. There's no need for anything. And I was almost thinking, like, if somebody were to actually design a retreat to invite people back to a sense of presence or whatever it may be, you might actually do these things and pay for it as part of some sort of retreat. Like, and I just thought it was so funny that this little creature was just like holding my hand and guiding me through these series of almost exercises to just go, yeah, this is all, I think you're totally nail on the head there with the sense of duality to it. Like, it's not to minimize the grief we might experience in this life or whatever it might be, or the sense of loss, but that bird was still sat on the tree, and there was still some beauty to appreciate in that.
Yeah, of course. It's funny, like what you said there, about, your, it's your daughter, isn't it? Is it your daughter? Yeah. So your daughter, like, almost like guiding you through, facilitating that journey.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, that's kind of like what's missing, is it's that journey back to reconnecting with the joy that we experienced as children, without the filter of the mind, without the various layers of bullshit that we've built up, beliefs about ourselves and the world, that have distorted being able to live a life that is filled with joy. Whereas children, my kids get up the crack of dawn, and it's like they're pretty much active and playing and running around, and sometimes I just want to bury my head in the pillow. But just as you were talking there, that's kind of like what it is. It's like they can be a compass that help guide us back to a part of ourselves that so badly needs to be reclaimed from cultural engineers that, that aren't really our friends, right? That's the truth of the matter. So I think it's the more we can tune in to those little beautiful moments with our kids, the more that we can start to reconnect with really living a life that feels joyful.
Because through the course of all these interviews, it's become so kind of almost, I'd use the word brutally apparent that it's, you mentioned earlier for someone else, it could be walking their dog in the morning. Like, if I'm there for that walk and the dog in the morning, as opposed to thinking I have to get back to do X, Y, and Z, that's another, that's obviously another gateway or opportunity. And I think this is what keeps me extremely optimistic, a bit like yourself, is I really sense that the invitations back are constant and they're so simple. And
Yes.
it's what, and it's not to say that I do this perfectly. Like, I'm on my own journey with these things as well. And at the same time too, I find that there's a remarkable ease to this that that can be experienced, that feels so far beyond or separate almost from that treadmill almost of validation that I think our culture does set us up to be a part of. Like, this is ingrained into us from a very early stage.
Yeah, I think it's like we are always trying to understand our purpose here on planet Earth. And if you looked around to the influencers on social media or even on LinkedIn, for example, all of these platforms, and you look at how we've been programmed, it's easy to believe that we're all here for some bigger purpose. And that may be true. But perhaps rather than focusing on what we do, it's rather trying to tune into who we are being in every moment, and like being able to like look through those eyes, being able to experience life as we move through it and as it moves through us. And maybe that is where the deeper sense of purpose, that deeper trust in life, because we live in this, society which has a bias for action. And that in itself is not a bad thing. But when it's not underpinned by a level of awareness, then, what you get, the outcome is a lot of very frustrated, unhappy, burnt out people, because, the outside world can never truly fulfill us. That's why you have extraordinarily wealthy people who are deeply unhappy, because they've worked hard, they've followed the recipe that they were told to follow, and they are still wrestling with the void, the hungry ghost that exists in all of us to some lesser or greater degree. And so that is, I suppose, when we're able to like reframe what life actually means, and begin to see beyond the pressure that often we feel to perform to these things, that. And, if you believed what you read, all the influence, everybody should be like an entrepreneur and everybody should be, super wealthy and running their own business and all of that. But that's not what makes society great. And I think it rides roughshod actually over like all of the beautiful things that are going on, and the opportunities we have to connect with each other from simple things, whether it's through our kids, through our community. These are all important aspects of what makes life really wonderful and beautiful and varied. It's not just about material accumulation.
What you said there, just around the ideas of our bias to action and the purpose, it also just made me. My daughter's got an obsession with pandas at the moment, and it made me laugh during the week that a panda could eat bamboo for about 9 hours of the day and sleeps for about 14 hours of the day. So I don't know, like, just there's something there's something in that just kind of makes me think of, yeah, like, whatever everyone else's or whatever this whole constellation is and the meaning and purpose of life, it just made me more think around the being or the experience or the felt sense of it, rather than it needs to be some sort of heroic act
Yeah,
to save and share with the world.
yeah,
You know, you mentioned something that word like the word love that doesn't always get mentioned. It's often implicitly suggested by relationships, friends, all of these kind of things. But just from your perspective, when you mentioned it, what is has the idea of love or the role of love taken on much of an evolution in your idea of in your own experience of a good life?
Yeah. It's funny because I think for a long time I probably didn't really truly love myself. Um, I think I saw within myself, and that was the right way to position it, but it was like little reflections. The love that I felt for myself was only in the areas of my life where I felt like I was being validated. But as I've cultivated a deeper sense of love for myself and appreciation for the gifts I have, and also for my frailties, my weaknesses, and being able to convey them, especially in, the nearest and dearest relationships I have, and to use the wisdom of these experiences to guide my children and also to guide other people. The more I've loved myself, the better leader I've become of my family, of myself, and in the workplace, for example, as well. Because I have nothing to guard. I don't need to protect myself so much. The armour can kind of come off, and that's what love does. It dismantles the armour of that we build in childhood or through difficult experiences to protect ourselves. And once that begins to penetrate our being, we begin to truly know like what choices and steps to make. I've never felt clearer on my journey than this moment now. I've never been healthier and fitter and actually more appreciative of all of the ups and downs that life has thrown at me. But, from that have developed an incredible sense of self-love, if you could call it that. And it just makes me appreciate more around me. I look around a lot of the time, I hear, having navigated a lot myself, but when I hear people moving through really difficult things, my mind doesn't leap to judgment. My mind often leaps to, there's a couple, going through a difficult time who are just working through their stuff. And stuff being the collective term for their blind spots, their triggers, their lack of love for themselves. And because when we begin to understand that, and look, I'll caveat this, I still have my own resentments and difficulties and frustrations, but I know at the core of my being that the more love I find for myself, the more compassion and understanding I know from within my being, the easier it actually is to give that to other people. And it doesn't mean you just sign off on people's shitty behaviour, right? It's not that at all. It's rather like I can see where that's coming from. And that's an amazing tool to have as you navigate the world, because it allows you to show up much better and how you support the people around you in your immediate life, whether it's in your family, your friends group, or in the workplace or in your community as well. And I think that's what the world needs more of right now.
Is there a particular moment that comes to mind for you where you noticed those defenses weren't being reinforced or kept up?
Such a great question. Um, I think it's been plainly obvious to me. I've had to pick over the shattered fragments of my life, as I've went through many different iterations, relationships, jobs, successes, failures, and like sort of picking them up. And my uncle said something to me which always has really stuck with me, which is like, he said to me, everything falling apart seems to be the only way us humans can learn, because then we sort of get the chance to rebuild everything, but in a better way. Um, and I feel like something that a lot of men struggle with, and I'm just going to speak for myself, but I do know from the work that I've done with others in coaching capacity or facilitation, I think that we do struggle to really share our voice authentically and to truly call out our needs, for fear of being perceived as weak or not masculine, and so I feel like the more the more courage I've shown to be able to speak to the deepest fears that I have and the deepest desires that I have, is that I notice that the defences come down. I feel a greater sense of ease when I'm able to acknowledge all the different parts of myself, even the parts of myself that maybe in the past I would have judged, that I wouldn't have wanted anybody else to know. But when I'm able to find a safe environment to like let those things go, and I'd say my most immediate relationship with my partner has been revelatory in that regard. But also like then being able to be around like other men, for example, and in particular actually other men, that's been a big pattern in my life. You know, I've felt a lot, a difficulty in being vulnerable around other guys, for example. But as I've been able to do that, I notice how it impacts on the energy of those around me. I notice that it gives others permission to go to those places within themselves as well, because I've sort of learned that my unwillingness to go to those places was causing a lot of grief and difficulty, not just in my life, but in the life of people who, had loved me and I'd loved them, so whether it was relationships, friendships, and there comes a point in the journey where you have to decide to take responsibility for your patterns and look at the role you're playing in your own suffering. So as I've done that, ironically, I've just found much more ease in the world. I feel disarmed. I feel, that I can be present like now without the armour, without having to guard something. I think we all make mistakes along the way in the journey. We don't get everything right. That's all part of human nature, right? I think it's just about like how do we bring a greater sense of understanding to who we are and what we've done, and use that to navigate going forward and turn our pain into power.
Isn't it kind of remarkable the tension that we can still feel sometimes in showing up in the way that we'd wish to, even with knowing all of this? Do
Oh,
you know what I mean?
I mean, yeah, it would be easy to listen to everything I'm saying here and be like, well, that sounds like he's evolved, but the evolution isn't necessarily that, you are beyond all of these patterns. It's the recognition that these things exist in you and being able to speak to your own shadow and own it and allow it to be present and contain it. That's where the real evolution is at. It's not necessarily that the tensions don't arise, because they do, because, I still feel triggered in certain situations. I still get overwhelmed regularly in different scenarios, whether it's through work or family. These things all still come up. But it's just like I have this awareness. I'm like, I know I'm going through this. I don't know about you, but if you've got young kids, for example, and you're trying to get them all changed at the same time, I'm like, right, guys, I'm gonna lose my temper. So can we just please get the shoes on, for example? It seems such a small thing, but it's that ability to speak to it, like to be able to like name it and for it to be conveyed without the projection,
Yeah, I think we're continuously looking for perfection, and it's almost a sickness, I think, and I think we're stunned. Like I'm stunned sometimes. Like even if it's a fight with my missus or something, and even if I can take a breath at some point and say, I love you, right, and proceed
Yeah.
to get into a temper about something and say something that may not seem like that, but I think it's just giving glimpses into the something beyond just the intensity of whatever it is that we're experiencing or whatever it is we're taken by. And all what you're pointing to as well, I think there's an incredible redemptive quality to the experience of being human if you can afterwards just totally own it and acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you as well, Alan, but you talk about our health and our well-being physically. But if I can totally own my part in something, man, that's such a relief. Like it's such a release from the mental loops, from the physical inflammation, from the tension in my body. If I can just look someone square in the eyes and say, this is totally my part here. What do you think? Do you know?
Yeah, because it would be very easy to feel disempowered in this world, right? There are, big forces at work, corporate interests, governmental forces, economic pressures. All of these things clearly these are tensions that we all are having to navigate to a greater or lesser degree. But then we also have this agency, this ability to make choices, So, it's ultimately me who determines what foods I put in my body, for example. It's up to me. It's ultimately me who determines the quality of the conversations I have. What do I hold back in order to keep the peace as against what do I share? Because I know that will strengthen the connection, even if in the short term, I feel a great sense of discomfort. I have the ability to control those things. And if I do those things, like you said, if I am doing those things and can hand in heart say that I'm in integrity with myself around, I've made the choice to, you know, have a few cheat meals at the weekend, or, I've made a conscious choice to not share that right now because maybe I need more time to process it or whatever. Like, I know that if I'm in integrity with myself, then like I know I can't be doing any more than that. And, the world will keep spinning and these big forces outside of ourselves will continue with their agendas, whatever they are. But that we have enormous power to own the quality of our own being through the choices that we make in everyday life. And I actually think that that's really what awakening is. It's not some supernatural process. It's waking up to our ability to influence this world and our world in particular, and to bring to bear all of the gifts and talents and unique perspectives that we hold as human beings, because there are 8 billion universes at work here on planet Earth, all consciously creating this, experience that we're all part of. So, I think those little steps that we can make to, polish the mirror of our awareness and heal our hearts and build a deeper sense of connection to ourselves and ultimately then to others. Because when we begin to understand ourselves, we understand others. And so, yeah, I think that can have a huge impact on what our life feels like day to day.
Totally, man. It feels like just as you were talking there, the images that were coming to mind were almost like safe harbor or a port in the storm. And I do believe that sense of integrity that you're touching on can offer that felt experience regardless of what's occurring outside of us. Really intrigued, man, to ask you about though you've gone through that sense of am I enough? The observations of where your validation comes from, talking about authenticity, level of integrity with self as well. Can you talk to me about the significance of, you mentioned at the very start the idea of sharing your gifts and the impact that has for you?
Yeah. I think there's something deep in all of us that wants to be seen, fully seen. I think that is also part of the journey here on this experience, through life and trying to be more understood. But I think we all have gifts. I think we all have something to give this world, and that those gifts cannot be quantified, because what we usually do is, we focus on the gifts that ultimately are the ones that give material success. But in some ways that has actually that's reduced the quality of all of the gifts we hold. So I feel like at this phase of my life, after going through many trials and tribulations, I've never felt more curious about how to show up. And as I came into this year, I've been on a bit of a journey, right? I've shared loads of stuff on LinkedIn, for example, on social media, and I've done loads of different projects. I've ran events, I've facilitated retreats, I've coached people, I've worked my full-time people/HR job. I've thought about the consultancy route. I've went down lots of different avenues, but I've just sort of come to the conclusion that, like, transmitting my gifts doesn't necessarily mean some divine purpose. It can just be in the everyday moments, a kind word, a supportive question, an opportunity to speak authentically, around other people. And there may not be some materialistic return on the question I've asked or the kind word I've given. But what has happened perhaps from time to time is that people have went off and thought about what I said or the energy I said it in. And it's given them an opportunity to reflect on who they are, the journey they've made, and how they want to show up. And I think that's at the core of where I'm at now. I'm less concerned about setting up let's hit a 10K every month coaching program. I'm more concerned just about being around the right human beings who allow me to amplify my abilities, my communicative abilities, being able to speak authentically to who I am and how I'm experiencing the world. And I think we're going through this big shift from like, here's how you do this to here's how I do this. I think that we're all curious about each other's world, right? And that's amazing. That's how we build better worlds. We build better businesses, we build better communities, better society. When we all start to get curious about what do we share, and there's more that we share than what we don't. But I think it also helps us to highlight the areas where we are different, and find ways through that, to be more constructive in how we handle conflict and differences. So for me, I don't have some grand plan now. I've been at that juncture many times. This is it. This is what's going to be going to take me to the next level. But actually, the next level is just in the next conversation and how I choose to show up in it. It's in what I do by it when I'm by myself, when nobody's looking now. It's how I embody these things that I'm saying. And there will be times when I don't reach that standard, and I've kind of like realised that that's okay, and I just have to keep working through that and keep speaking to those things when, actually I didn't quite think that through properly. I didn't think about all the ways that could have been received or how that would have landed, or maybe I was too self-interested there. But it's not guarding those things, it's being able to speak to them and recognising that this is all just a big journey.
I think what you've just described there is it's almost the path to realizing that it's enough. Like not only just in the small day-to-day stuff and the significance of that. I think we live in a world where there's such a tension between paying attention to what the felt experience of life versus what we're told as a story or the aspirations of life. And it can be so easy to get caught up, even in that, even after we've made that realization. But there's just no end to the ways in which that you or I will err. Like, do you know what I mean? And just the way you described that there, I think the coming to peace with that being it, but that's still not a reason to be defensive. I think nothing shows a level of developing self-love, acceptance, or enoughness than a willingness to share what your human experience is, irrespective of those things.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think it's like, it's something I always think about. We talk about like self-love and what does that actually mean? And, we live in this society that seems to be like, I always think about, when like you get like PTs and they share these before and after pictures, or you've been on like a fitness journey and it's like, here I was, like a year ago and, I was out of shape and 2 stone heavier and here's all the bad habits I had. And then it's like, here I am now, and it's like, here's all the good stuff I'm doing. And look, I celebrate anybody who's on a journey of change, right? But we have to be careful, and this is the duality piece. It's like, if you believe that the person, say, on the right-hand side is less worthy of love than the person on the left-hand side, then you're still stuck in the cage that you're trying to get out of, right? So it's like, if the idea that the person that you were before is less deserving of love and support and validation than who you are now, then you stay trapped. Because, we're always growing, we're always evolving, and, and at any one time, everybody's just doing the best they can from their level of self-awareness and ability to regulate themselves and to process the past. And, there are many forces at work, but we live in this almost like shame-based culture, that wants to that celebrates, the evolution of self through, well, shaming, and whether it's body shaming or the habits we've got, and but everybody is on a journey, and for most people there are some beings where they just, they go through a revelatory change, in a short period of time. But for many of us, there's a gentle flowering of deeper levels of awareness and understanding, and those are the things that can help us to make changes in our lives. That's the things that can help us, if it's a fitness journey you want to go on, then it becomes more attainable when you've actually came to some level of understanding that, look, you are on a journey, and and not everything will be perfect. You might still have a donut from now and again. That's okay, or whatever that might be. But I genuinely believe that we have to try to love all parts of ourselves, and really, come to a level of peace about the path that we've all followed. And I think that can ultimately lead to a lot more peace.
It feels like a fairly fitting time, Alan, to ask you the question of what is a good life for you?
A good life for me, I thought carefully about this, and even through the course of our conversation, it's readily apparent. A good life is one that's evolving, one we are coming to understand the journey that we've made, the path that we're on. We're building an awareness of who we are, and we're able to utilize all of those forces to carve out the next step, because there will always be a next step. There will always be somewhere else. You're never standing still, even if it feels like you're not doing anything. You are, by the very nature of life itself, evolving and growing. And I think that's what makes a good life, is to be in alignment with that cascade of change that life puts us through, and getting used to going through all of the transitions that come with that, the endings, and the place between the worlds, if we could call it that, between the old and the new, and then, and then embracing the new beginning before the cycle begins again, so it's like that constant shift and evolution of life is what makes a good life. And being in tune with it and being at peace with it, and being able to then become the conscious director of that force. And I think, for me at least anyway, my life has got a heck of a lot better the more that I am able to realise that I can orchestrate life. Things don't necessarily just happen to me, that, even through the difficult moments, that I have a level of agency, like we talked about, and that evolution is what, keeps the record of life spinning.
Throughout the course of this conversation, Alan, I think that it's become, it's a beautiful way of just showing the sheer complexity, the various nuances and the various facets of life, and how much of it seems to be returning home to some sort of sense of self-acceptance or love or enoughness, not with altering and controlling everything, but by kind of participating and being at peace with it. So, Alan, look, I really appreciate the time you've taken today, and thank you so much for joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It's been an absolute joy. I appreciate the time. Thank you.